We are holding on Daf Chaf Daled on the base, page 24b, and we've learned a number of halachas. We learned about tefillin. We learned about the laws of tznius, and we spoke yesterday about we spoke about laws of mechitza, separating during davening between the men and the women. If that's allowed with a glass mechitza or not, what the reason for it is the reason for mechitza to make sure people are not hanging out together and becoming
familiar,
frivolous, and or is it because a person might come to think improper thoughts? If it's about thoughts, then a glass mechitza would be prohibited. If the reason is not to mingle and have become lightheaded and frivolous, so that would be prohibited. That would be permitted as long as there's a mechitza separation, that it separates. And then we also spoke about the law of not listening to a female singing, and that also had situations where there might be room for leniency if it's on a radio and you're not actually listening to the female's voice, or if it's on, if it's being recorded, if it's on a radio or a CD, a computer. And the question was, depends on what the reason for it is. Is the reason for not listening also, is that because of hear her, it's going to cause a person to think about a female, or is it because that is considered nakedness? Listening to a female sing is basically like her exposing herself. If it's about nakedness, then there might be room for leniency. If it's recorded, because it's a machine, it's not actually a female. And then if the reason is because of it could lead to someone having negative thoughts, so that would be prohibited, even if it's a machine, because ultimately you're hearing the same voice that the female that a female has. Now, at the same, there is an intermediate opinion. There's an opinion that's in the middle of this and says it depends if you recognize the woman, then it would be prohibited, because by recognizing, so you're putting a face to the voice, and that that would be much more reason to prohibit it, because you're recognizing the person and you're hearing the voice could lead to negative thoughts and so on. So those were the different opinions that, and it based on the reasons behind it. What's the reason for the law? Then the interesting question would be regarding if your neighbor is blasting music and you want to recite Shema, what do? They're blasting the music. You're hearing a female singing, and you can't recite Torah when there is nakedness in front of you. And here the sound goes, reverberates throughout your house. You have no way of getting around it. What do you do if you want to recite Shema and the neighbor's music is blasting with a female voice? So in this scenario, the Mishnah Berurah, if I'm not mistaken, brings that it's called Eis La Hashem Heferu Tarasecha. This is a time when you have a leniency. Of course, you shouldn't listen, try to remove any thoughts of the music from your mind, but you would be allowed to recite the Shema, even though the music is blasting, because this is a moment of oines. You're sort of like, you have no choice, which is interesting, because that wouldn't necessarily be the case if someone was locked up in a let's say in a bathroom that scenario would probably be different. There wouldn't be you wouldn't have a leniency of because it's that's like disgusting. And here it's more it's not an issue of disgustingness. It's an issue of erva, and it seems like that would be the reason why the Mishnah Brura is lenient in that scenario. Let me just pull up a Mishnah Brura here.
You need to put cotton in your ears.
You say that again?
You need to put cotton in your ears.
Right. Interesting. That's a good question, because when it comes to seeing, we said there's two opinions if you're not looking. You're right. So how does that work with hearing? Is it considered it's in front of you? Can you just block your ears? And that's a very interesting point, Ben, because just like I wonder if the same two opinions would say the same thing regarding hearing music. In other words, with regard to vision, we said there's two views. If you're not looking, there is room for leniency. There is one opinion that says it's fine if you close your eyes. How does that work with hearing? Can you is it considered in front of you because the sound is right there, so it doesn't matter if you hear it personally, or does it, would it be the same laws? I see Ruben wants to say something, and I just saw it. Noise canceling headphones, right? Well, yeah, you could just plug your ears up with something, but this is now the law of don't get mistaken. The law of listening to a female singing is not only during the prayers, but the law applies always. But during the prayers, it creates a new issue, because the question is, if you're not allowed to recite prayers in front of nakedness, that's an additional problem. In other words, in general, a person's not supposed to listen to any female singing, so it's a prohibition on its own. But this would be an additional issue. In fact, there's an argument among the commentaries. What happens if you read the Shema in front of a person who's exposed? So you realized afterwards, I said the Shema, and the person wasn't dressed properly in front of me. So there's two opinions. One opinion is you have to re-say the Shema. The other opinion is no, you were Yaitza anyway. So this issue would apply even after the fact. Let me just pull this up. Some Mishnah Brura here about the sound, music blasting, and this Mishnah Brura.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
If you have kavona, if you're going to be saying the Shema, how can you? I mean, to me, I wouldn't even hear or even know what's going on in the outside world if I'm going to be praising God, praising Hashem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be thinking or I mean, to me, it couldn't happen to me, is what I'm saying.
Well, most people are not able to totally.
Please, I have neighbors that blast music at the most not the best time, right at sunset. Okay, when I'm saying the prayers, I block it out.
Some people can do two things at the same time.
I mute myself during class because I have a rooster that crows. But if it doesn't bother anybody, I'll leave it. But that's why I mute, because I don't want to disturb the class.
Right. So
Thank you.
So that's interesting that you're able to do that. Most people, especially nowadays when we are constantly looking at our phones, so we're constantly thinking about two things
I
at
don't
once,
do that.
three things.
I don't I am not. I'm in my life.
Right.
my.
I'm just saying you're
I-
different. You're different than most people. So the Mishnah Berurah is over here in chapter 75. Chapter 75, and he mentions that if there is a woman singing, you should repeat the Shemona Esrei afterwards. If you said the Shema and there was a woman singing, then he says, in paragraph 17, he says, if you're in a place where there's goyim and you're forced, there's no choice, there's music blasting, you can't protest. So since biblically, that's the point, since biblically it's not called an erva, not called nakedness, you would be you're allowed to recite the Shema and make blessings, because if not so, you'll end up not doing Torah and Tefillah. You'll never be able to learn Torah. And you'll never be able to learn Torah. Imagine, you live in town school, you live in an area where it's like blasting music constantly, or, therefore it's called Eis Las Hashem Eifir Terasecha, but you should make sure, try to concentrate on the Kedusha that you're involved in, and not to allow yourself to think about the music. So as Susan says, she can do it. But for the rest of us, we have to try as much as we can, to try to concentrate. Okay, so that's an interesting halacha. And then the Gemara talked about hanging the tefillin. And actually, I skipped this. The shaitelach. We spoke about shaitels, the idea of covering one's hair in order to daven. A woman's hair must be covered. I also mentioned to you that there is one opinion that people are rely on in case of need, that because nowadays women don't cover their hair, there's room to be lenient if a woman's hair is not covered, to say to daven in front of it. There's one opinion that you might be able to rely on. It's called the Aruch HaShulchan. Now, a lot of people mistaken that to think that a woman doesn't need to cover her hair. It doesn't say that. It's 100% prohibited. A woman must cover her hair, as it says in Shulchan Aruch, that if a woman's hair is not covered, the man could divorce her without even paying her the cost of the ksuba. He would not even have to pay the ksuba. So it's for sure an obligation for a woman to cover her hair, especially in public. There's no, amongst, if there's anyone around, she would need her hair covered. But if you were stuck in a situation where a person's hair was uncovered, exposed, then you would be allowed to say Shema according to that opinion. The law of that's basically the idea of a sheitel or a tichel, that a woman's hair should be covered. And I should mention the Rebbe always encouraged sheitelach more than tichels, because sheitels are, you're not going to take it off. It's much more. It looks nice, it looks decent, and it covers one's hair. So it's a perfect option for a woman to cover her hair. Sheitel.
But is a sheitel, and to use the term sniudi, is it, if you're covering your hair with hair, what's the difference between hair and hair?
It's a good question. If the logic behind it was was not to see anyone's hair. That's not to look at hair. That's a problem. But it's based on the fact that the hair must be covered. So because her hair must be covered, this is covering her hair, and what it does is it takes away the excitement that you see this beautiful woman, but really it's her. She's dressed. Really, it's something else on her. So she doesn't feel like she's wearing her hair, and so you're not seeing her hair, and she's not feeling that she has that she's showing off her hair.
With
So
all due respect, I disagree with that. Because many women's shaitel looks a lot better than their natural hair.
Don't say that in front of your wife.
My wife is not here today right now, so I'm okay.
Right. But the idea is that the hair must be covered. The fact is that the hair must be covered, and this is considered a covering. So it's considered okay. It's discussed in the, it's interesting, it's discussed in the, in Tractate Shabbos, and there's a commentary in the back, which is really interesting. It's called, he says, the name, the commentary is the Shilte Giborim, and he writes that even if it's her own hair that was cut off, and it's now just attached to her, and now not attached, now it's just covered, now it's on top, now she's using it as a wig, even that is good, and it's considered a hair cover, because the fact is how she looks, and this is something else on top of her, it basically it's covering. The fact is it's covered. I was adding on a little explanation and understanding that it's not her own beauty anymore, but it doesn't say that. I'm just adding that on. But the point is, again, it's not that you're not allowed to look at someone looking nice, but it shouldn't be provocative. And so obviously if a shaitel was provocative, that would also be an issue. But if it's a woman is allowed to look nice, and she should look nice.
Right.
And so that's, don't confuse looking nice and being exposed. This is simply that her body is not exposed. And this is making sure that her body is not exposed. But anyway, that's not the main discussion here. Here we're talking about reciting Shema and, or just in general, reciting anything holy that she should be covered. And so the actual laws of Sheitlach, would definitely not be, it's definitely not an issue here, because this is not her, you're not seeing a woman that's exposed if she's wearing a sheitel. But I see we have a few questions. Robert had his hand up, and Ben, I don't know who's first. So
I just wanted, thank you, Ben. What Raymond had said, is there a commentary somewhere that essentially makes the parameters of what is attractive versus being provocative?
I guess it's hard to draw the line.
Yeah,
well, I don't know. Maybe it's not. I guess it's, people who are in the entertainment business will tell you what the difference is.
Like,
if they say it's not good enough, then it means it's not provocative.
Okay. Or the
And
women
it's up to the man. It's up to the man to not be provoked.
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point, that you have your obligation. But again, if you divide the two, again, it's both. A woman shouldn't try to act provocative. She should look nice, but she shouldn't try to act provocative. And a man has to concentrate on not feeling provoked, whether a female is looking that way or not, and whatever his personal emotional hormones cause him to feel attracted. He should try to, he should make sure not to be in such scenarios where he's going to feel attracted. So, that's in addition. In other words, all these laws that deal with a woman not being exposed, they also have as Raymond is saying, there's also the man's side of things. And that is that he should know that even though something might be permitted, it's not necessarily appropriate for him, because he might feel, attracted. Like, for example, if a person has an issue, I don't know, where he sees certain women and he feels attracted to them, and he shouldn't. If that shul they daven with a glass mechitza, maybe he shouldn't be going to that shul, or maybe he should change his seat, or maybe he should go. But the point is that each person, people have to. We have to, in addition to all these laws, there's also the obligation on oneself to not enter in situations where they're going to feel provoked. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say the prohibition is probably on seeing the live hair on a woman. So if she cuts it off and puts it in a sheitel, it's a sheitel.
Right.
It's not live hair. So.
Yes, Robert.
I don't want to beat the subject into the ground, but when you go to a restaurant, you go to a bakery, there's your mashkiach, and
Right.
clearly there's a regulation of what is kosher. So
mashkiach for him.
my thinking is there are people, what I expect are women, who have sheitel shops, and women go there for a fitting, and it's appropriateness for them to wear. So is there any criteria that has been developed, and essentially not telling women a wig that would be too provocative, I'm saying, that would be appropriate within the context of Jewish law? And I don't know. I mean, like everything else is regulated because you should not sin or should not be duped into eating food that's not kosher.
Right.
What about going to one of the stores?
It's an interesting question. Yeah, it's an interesting question you asked. There are certain communities that have rules about the sheitels, how long the hair could be, and so on, things like that. So I think that's exactly what
that's part of it.
Trying to answer that issue.
I mean, because we're all vain to some way from one level to another, okay? And sometimes our vanity blinds us to how we really present ourselves. We may, feel, oh, I look great, but to somebody else, it's less than great, we'll call it, okay? So that's just my concern.
If I could
Good point, Robert. Ruvain wanted to say something, and Susan, I don't know who's first, so let me just, Ruvain, I think, let me let him go first, yes. You're muted.
I was at a vort last night at an engagement party, and my wife and one other woman were the only two women in Sheitlach. No one else. They all had their head covered in different kinds of
Hasidic coverings.
But in that community, it's a sheitel is not permitted.
Not allowed.
Right.
Right. Very interesting. Good point. Very interesting point. Yes, Susan.
Something else. When I go out in public, or if I go to a temple, wherever, I will cover my head. I will not wear jewelry. I make it myself not obvious.
Right.
So
well, it's only
wig. It kind of makes you less. You don't want to. You're not looking to flirt. You're not looking for a date. You're already taken. You're not. In other words, it makes a woman maybe more aware that this is a time to be subdued.
Well, not a time to be subdued. See, I think you're taking it too far.
Okay. What I'm saying is that to flirt with your husband is in your own private home, not out in public.
Right. Now, I should mention that the interesting law about here is that a woman was never married, she is allowed to. Her hair is not considered exposed, so to speak. It's not part of her private. It's not part of her body that should be covered. But when a woman gets married, her hair becomes, so to speak, a part of her body that should be that should be covered, that's considered,
That's
you
more
know,
clear.
so it's a very
That-
interesting, that itself is complicated. How do you deal with that change? Like, why does all of a sudden, when she gets married, part of her body now become prohibited to pray in front of, and something that's considered
And a
practice
widow?
when she wasn't, it's not a problem.
And a
Now,
widow?
a widow and a divorcee, generally, the law is that they also are supposed to cover their hair. But there is small room for leniency. I didn't look this up, but there's a known tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein where he talks about a woman who could not get a job. She was a widow. She couldn't get a job, and she needed to support her kids. She couldn't get a job because she was wearing a sheitel, and she wanted to know if there would be any leniency if she would be able to. She needed to support her family. This was a very serious necessity. She needed to support her kids. She had no money. Her husband passed away, and she wanted to know if there's any room for leniency, that she won't wear a sheitel or a tichel or whatever, that she could wear her natural hair and she'll be able to get this job. And Rav Moshe Feinstein gave her, in such a scenario, he gave her a heter, a leniency, which means that it's not the norm to get it's not the, it wasn't, that was a dire necessity. But under normal circumstances, generally they're supposed to have their hair covered. Yes, Avram. Oh, I'm sorry. Susan had a question up first. I'm so sorry. Susan, did you want to say something, Susan?
No, it's okay. I
Oh,
already said it. Thank you.
Avram. Avram, you're muted. You're muted still. Yeah.
I got it. Sorry. What happens if you're working in a company and there's a very attractive Gentile married woman, and you work with her? She's in the desk next to you. Is there any limitation? Do you look away? What is the situation there? Because it's going to influence you anyway. It's going to get your hormones.
Very good question. Very good question. That's a good question. Anyone want to take that challenge and answer it?
Change the position of your
Anyone
desk.
here? I mean, that's a good question.
Seems to me it's the same thing as your widow. You've got to make a living. You've got to work with with the person, work in the surroundings that you're employed in, and either you work there or you don't.
Yeah.
So
think
what
it's
what are you
personal.
advising, Raymond?
I advise them to be a man and look as little as possible and get your work done.
I mean, that's a call for
Uh-huh.
self-discipline. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's up to each person.
Well, I guess it depends to what extent he's able to control himself and work on himself. If he finds it impossible, he definitely should consider getting another job. Because there are certain. What is that?
Move the desk.
Right. So if it's possible is one thing, but if he's constantly seeing her, and also there's sometimes where you have people are constantly showing themselves to you because she also might be looking at him, and so it's not always so easy. I mean, you have to realize that the scenario, it depends on the scenario. It's not always, it's not always so simple like that. And so sometimes that would be a sign. It's almost like working on, so you have to give up a job. If they force you to work on Shabbos, this would be a similar situation. And I'm sure a person's wife would want them to give up that job than for them possibly to end up, having an affair. So so just keep that in mind as well. It might affect his own marriage. It's not just it's not just a halachic issue here. Just think about it practically. there are scenarios where the best thing you could do is to get another job. Okay,
Easy-
so yeah, I'm sorry.
Easy said than done. Easy said than done.
Right. Well, it depends how valuable the marriage is. Your person's marriage is as well. You know what I mean? Some people, their job is worth more than their marriage. Some people, their marriage, I would hope most people, their marriage is worth more than their job. But yeah, you're right. It is definitely, it's not easy to give up a job, especially for a man to give up their source of sustenance. You're right. It's definitely not easy, but if but it's it's something that they want to be able to, to live a normal life. This is like it's almost like they're imprisoned, when they're in this scenario like that, if they're constantly having these negative, impure thoughts. So it's like their whole life is imprisoned now with these thoughts. Their thoughts are sort of like, locking them up and not allowing the person to flourish and thrive. Chances are he'll probably get fired anyway because he's not be able to concentrate enough on his work. So it might be smarter, to leave before they tell you to leave.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
But anyway, just some thoughts. I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought I'd have more people from the audience sharing. But okay, guess not. Okay, now the Gemara further mentioned about hanging one's tefillin, and the Gemara said that the Gemara said two things. The first answer the Gemara gave, the Gemara said it seems like a contradiction, and the Gemara answered that hanging the tefillin by the straps would be prohibited. Hanging the tefillin where the box of the tefillin is on top and the straps are hanging, that would be permissible. That was the first thing the Gemara said. But then the Gemara said that both are prohibited. You don't hang tefillin, but you could hang the bag of the tefillin. And the Gemara said, well, why would you think you can't hang the tefillin bag? I mean, what's bad about that? The Gemara answered that the Sefer Torah, just like a Sefer Torah is supposed to be placed on something, so also the tefillin bag, you'd think maybe needs to be placed on something, and therefore the Gemara answers that it doesn't. And you could hang the tefillin bag. If you have a hook and your tefillin has a hole that could be hanged from, or a string or something, you would be allowed to hang the tefillin bag, which is interesting that the Sefer Torah, you're not allowed to have hanging. Now, you would think maybe if they made a certain, like a fancy shul had some type of a, you would think that maybe if they had some impressive, ark that was sort of like hanging, that would be, very nice and cute, and, but the Shulchan Aruch, and not only that, it says it's not allowed to be nailed into the wall. It has to be on something. The ark for the Shulchan, for the Torah has to be on something. And we're just looking at that halacha, and that's, it seems like it's based from our Gemara here, but it's Dalet Amud Aleph. Here it says, even if the Aron Kodesh is attached with yesedos, with pegs to the wall, it's usher. If it's not on top of something, there has to be something under it.
Maybe they're talking about smaller Torahs that you can hang.
Right. I don't know. In any event, that's the laws of Sefer Torah.
Rabbi, is it a possible fear that wherever the Torah is being placed in, if it falls, then the entire congregation that's there would then be required to fast for the entire 40 days? And so they really don't want to have that happen. Therefore, they require a base for the Aron, so that doesn't happen. I mean, that to me is a reasonable or it's a reasonable reason, if you want to call it that, for not having it being hung from a wall or something like that.
Maybe, yeah, maybe that's the reason. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, it sounds like I mean, I don't think it's so that the people don't have to fast. I think it's so that the Sefer Torah isn't embarrassed, by falling. In other words, that's what I would think. It would be more about the honor of the Sefer Torah. But yeah, I have to look it up and see what where that is in Shulchan Aruch, and
that's also the fear when you do Agba.
right.
That's why you have two gabayim, one on either side.
Right.
Yeah, here where is it from? A Sefer Torah. Here it says it's also to hang tefillin, but you're allowed to hang them in the bag. And then the Mishnah Berurah says Sefer Torah is also to hang in all cases, even when it's in the Aron Kodesh, in the B'toila ha'Aron HaKodesh. Even if the Aron Kodesh is attached with Yesedos to the wall, you know what? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to translate it differently. It could be the Aron Kodesh could be hanging. It's about the Sefer Torah not hanging. I was reading from a source here. Let me just read
they said if it's
even when the
attached to
Kodesh
the
could be Yesedos. Sefer Torah is also to hang, even when it's in the Aron Kodesh. B'toila ha'Aron Kodesh. Feel like Aron Kodesh, B'toila Aron Kodesh. And the Aron Kodesh is attached, even if the Aron Kodesh is attached to all Kol She'eino Mitachtav Davar Ma. I'm not sure if that means if the Aron Kodesh is hanging or not. Let's see what it says here. B'toila Aron Kodesh. Sefer Torah is also to hang in all cases. And even when it's in Aron Kodesh, and the Aron Kodesh is toila, is hanging. So maybe it does mean it's hanging. The Aron Kodesh is hanging. And even if the Aron Kodesh is attached to the wall, it's still also to hang the Sefer Torah in the Aron Kodesh. Anyway, whatever it is, I don't know what the case would be where you would hang a Sefer Torah. I don't know how practical that would be. Okay, let's continue. So then the next Gemara said that Reb Chanina said, I saw Rebbe that he burped and he yawned and he sneezed and he spat and he rubbed his clothing to get rid of a louse that was biting him, and but he would not take the talus that fell off him and put it back on. And it says when he was mefahek, which means when he yawned, he would put his hand over his senteroi, over his jaw, so that people wouldn't see his mouth opening. Some question if the Gemara actually says those words, but there's two versions in the Gemara if the Gemara actually has that. But then the Gemara asked a question about a person. The brisa that we bring to ask a question, it mentions a few other points. It mentions not to scream during the prayers, or not to even recite prayers out loud, which is very interesting. That the Zohar says that when a person davens, they should not even say the words loud enough to hear them. You should say the words, you have to say it with your mouth, but in Zohar it says that you don't actually say the words so loud that you will hear them. In Shulchan Aruch, it's mashma that you're supposed to hear the words that you say, and when a person says the words out loud, generally it helps them with their kavana, helps them concentrate. And so you would think that reciting words out loud should be fine, but let's see where it says this in Shulchan Aruch. So this is in chapter 92 in Shulchan Aruch. And I'm just looking at the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch here. No, it's not in chapter 92. Chapter 92 talks about not spitting.
Yeah.
A person who spits, he shouldn't daven until he waits the amount of time it would take to walk 4 amos, 6 to 8 feet. And a person who's davening should not spit
Rabbi.
One second. He is allowed to spit, and even during the davening, he would be allowed to spit. And what does it say here? Because we're going to be discussing that here in a moment. A person who it's as if he's spitting in front of a king. Therefore, it's usher to spit unless he's an eines, he's forced. I guess what that means is if like he has indigestion, some type of a heartburn or something. So even if he's in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, if he's not, even if he's at the end where it's almost considered like he's done, doesn't matter. If he didn't walk backwards the steps, he is like he's standing before a king. But if he needs to,
spit it in his talus.
Then it would be permissible. But he shouldn't spit on the floor, but rather in his garment, in a way that it won't be visible, like in an undergarment, or if he has a handkerchief. But if he's disgusted by that, then he throws it behind him. So that's about spitting. And what happens if he's being bit by a louse? So he should move his clothing to remove it so that he's able to concentrate. But he shouldn't move it with his hand, it's because it's disgusting, and he's standing before Hashem. Now, if he's not in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, it's not a problem. You're allowed to spit, you're allowed to remove the louse, of course, and so that's regarding lice. But I was looking for about person davening out loud, and
can I say something, Rabbi?
yes.
In the
Yes.
Steinsaltz, I saw that he said, well, you might put it in your talus or in your head covering. But then somebody said, well, I can't stand it and I can't pray when it's in my head covering. So
You can't what? Pray?
can't pray. I can't concentrate and pray when I feel it in my head covering. So
The spit.
right. But as far as the voice, if you can hear it, then the guy next to you can hear it too. So
Right.
it's disturbing.
It's
That's why
disturbing.
they say you should hear that you are talking, but not really the words. In other words, very low voice
Right.
that you can hardly recognize what you're saying.
Right. Good point. That's it. So I'm seeing now. It's in chapter 101. I'm sorry before I said the wrong source. It's in chapter 101 in Shulchan Aruch. So it says that a person shouldn't daven in his heart, but he has to say the words with his lips, and he should listen with his ears, like what Ben just mentioned, quietly. And he shouldn't make it heard his voice, that other people who's standing outside his Dalet Amais, outside his 6 to 8 feet, another person should not be able to hear him. And if a person does this, it's as if he thinks Hashem doesn't hear his voice. And the rabbis were masakin tefillah quietly, completely, that it should only be heard to his ears in order not to embarrass those that are saying vidui, they're confessing during their prayer. And it shouldn't be embarrassing to those that are confessing for certain sins that might be very embarrassing. Now, if he's not able to be machaven, if he's reciting prayers quietly, so, or if he could have kavana, have more intent, if he says the words louder, he's allowed to recite the words louder to have more kavana if he's davening alone. But if he's in a congregation, if he's in a tzibur, it's usher to, it's prohibited for him to make his voice louder because he's going to cause other people, if he's with the congregation, is going to cause them to not be able to concentrate, to confuse them. But so if he can't have kavana, if it says it quietly, he should daven in his house. Now, in his house, he would be allowed. There is another reason he's allowed to daven out loud. If he wants his family members to learn from him how to daven, the words of the prayers. So he would be allowed to daven out loud. So, for example, in the olden days, they didn't have sidurim. How did they learn how to daven? So the father would daven at home out loud, and the kids would listen, and the wife, the kids, they would listen, and they would learn how to daven. And he mentions that on Rosh Hashanah, in Yom Kippur, the custom is to recite the words more louder in order for people to learn from each other, because otherwise they won't know the prayers. So again, we're talking about in the time when they didn't have sidurim for everyone. It's also in order to have more kavana during the days of tshuva. They should be able to concentrate better, and we're not afraid that you'll cause others to make mistakes. Oh, I guess maybe here he says the reason why you're not afraid others will make mistakes because they have their own sidurim in machzorim. So I guess I have to take back what I said. It's not only on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur that they should. I guess even if you have a siddur, you sort of need to hear it from someone so you don't. There's certain mistakes you might constantly make, and if you hear it from someone who's saying it properly, you'll learn the correct way of saying it. So I guess even if you have a siddur and a machzor, it's still not perfect. It's still good to hear it from someone else. So on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, they all have the machzorim. So therefore, it would be allowed to follow the custom that people recite their davening a little louder so other people can hear them. And nevertheless, it's better if they daven quietly, if they're able to have kavanah.
Rabbi, I think on Rosh Hashanah and those holidays, people that are not baki in davening are coming too. And that's why they say they should hear it from somebody. Regularly, the people know how to pray. So on holidays, right. Yeah, there is more people coming.
Well, that's interesting. Here he says the reason is they're not familiar with the prayers.
Right. Because
so even if they're familiar with
shul, they're not going to shul all the time.
No. They're familiar with the shul prayers. They're not familiar with the Rosh Hashanah prayers. But that you're also right. Your point is correct. But I think here is talking about the point that people who come to shul often, they're still not familiar with Rosh Hashanah prayers, which are only 2 days a year.
That's true too, yeah.
Yeah. So. But your point is correct. I think that's what he means here. So it's nevertheless, it's better to daven quietly if you're able to have kavanah, and you for sure shouldn't scream out loud. Screaming the prayers, that's considered like a navi sheker, because the false prophets, they screamed, and that's what we see in our Gemara. Nevertheless, a shliach tzibur that davens louder to awaken the kavanah, and people should hear clearly, he's doing good, because the main purpose of the shliach tzibur is for the daven out loud. But if they're doing it to show their loud voice, that's not appropriate. And then he says you do fulfill the mitzvah if you daven, if you don't hear it at all with your ears, but at least you said it with your lips. So it's interesting. He doesn't bring the Zohar that says that a person should not hear it with their ears. 62 in the laws of Shema, he mentions that chapter 62, he mentions a person should hear it with his ears, what he says, but if he didn't, he's yoitze, he's fulfilled the obligation, as long as he said it with his lips. Yep, doesn't bring the Zohar here either. Okay, so that's interesting. The common halacha is that you're supposed to hear it with your ears. I was just wondering if there's any source in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch to bring that Zohar, because they bring it in the it's brought down in other places in the Mishnah Berurah and other places. They bring that statement from the let's see, in chapter 101. In the Mishnah Berurah here. Anyway, it's brought down in the commentaries on Shulchan Aruch about the Zohar, but the common halacha is that person should hear it with their ear. So again, let's look back. We're on 24b, and we were learning about the person who's davening, and he's supposed to hear it with his. He's supposed to daven and hear it, but he's not supposed to daven out loud. And because if you daven out loud, too loud, it's as if you think that Hashem doesn't hear you, and if you scream your davening, it's as if you are a Navi Sheker, similar to a false prophet. And then it mentioned about a person burping and yawning. It's considered like a arrogant person. A person who sneezes is considered a bad sign. And some say it's recognizable that he's disgusting. A person who spits in his tefillah, it's as if he's spitting before a king. So the Gemara asked, and let's start with that. I think we'll start with the word bishleima. We're on 8 lines down from the top of the page on 24b. Bishleima megahik umafahik. So the Gemara is asking, was really asking a question. It's the Brisa said that we just brought. It said that you're not allowed to do all these things. And the previous Gemara had said that Reb Chanina said he saw Rebbe do these things. So this is the issue that we're dealing with. You're not supposed to do these things, the Brisa says, but Rebbe Chanina saw Rebbe do all these things. So the Gemara says not a question, not a contradiction. It's good when with regard to burping and yawning. It depends if you do it at your own wish, or if it's you have no choice. If you yawn, a yawn comes to you, you're yawning. So that's but if you burp on purpose, that would be a inappropriate during Shemini Esrei. Ela masatish kasha. But one place it says you're not supposed to sneeze, and the other place it says that the Rebbe would sneeze during davening. So the Gemara answer is not a contradiction. It's not a contradiction. It depends if you sneeze above, meaning in your mouth. If your mouth you sneeze, that's actually considered a good sign. The Amar Reb Zera says, "Ha milsa ivleli be Rav Hamnuna." This matter was a wonder to me, and I was able to learn it in the Beis Medrash of Rav Hamnuna. And 1 second here.
Hello.
This matter was explained to me in the Beis Medrash of Rav Hamnuna. And what was that? Particularly, he kules Talmuda, and it is equal to me like the entire Talmud, meaning it was so valuable. It's precious to me. And the reason is, why was it precious to him? Because he used to sneeze a lot during davening. This rabbi, Rav Hamnuna, he would sneeze a lot during davening, and it hurt him that he thought it was maybe a bad sign. So it says that simen yafalai, hamasatish b'tfilos, a person who sneezes during davening, it's simen yafalai. It's a good sign. The same way he has a pleasantness down here on earth. Similarly, he's having a pleasantness milmaila above, from above. The same way he's feeling good. In other words, after a person sneezes, he feels like his nose is relieved from that feeling that he needed to sneeze. So the same way he's got relief, he's getting a good feeling below. The same way above, meaning in heaven, they are doing him a nachas ruach, a pleasantness above. So the same way. So that's what a sneeze symbolizes. Maybe that's why people walk around shul with snuff. Used to be there's a old custom in certain shuls. One guy goes around with this snuff, and people take a little pinch of it, and they
shmek tabak.
Shmek tabak. Thank you. So it's considered a good sign in the middle of Shemini Esrei if you sneeze. So I'm wondering if you take a little before Shemini Esrei and you sneeze during Shemini Esrei, if you could maybe work it out, it's like a good sign. It's considered a good symbol. I don't know if it works. If you do it on your own. I guess if the sneeze comes to you from heaven, in other words, if you have to sneeze naturally, I think that's when it's considered a good sign. I don't know if it helps if you plan it. You take the snuff and you end up sneezing. But anyway, it's considered a good sign. So that's the answer. So when Rebbe would sneeze during davening, that was a good sign. When the Brisa talks about sneezing, it's considered a bad sign, and it's considered, look, it's disgusting. That's talking about passing gas. That's a sneeze, what the Gemara calls a sneeze from below. But a sneeze from above is considered a good sign. And that's what Rebbe would sneeze during davening. So it's considered a good sign. I guess if no one's in front of you and you put your hand in front, at least to block the, of course, you don't want to sneeze on someone else, but it's considered a good sign. Maybe
that's why they call it nachat ruach. It gives you pleasure from the bottom.
No. We're talking about a sneeze is nachas ruach, not.
No, they say it from the mala and lemata.
No, but when we're talking about the nachas ruach, we're talking about lamaila, meaning milmaila means from heaven.
Yeah,
there's
right,
a different.
Right. But it could have
nachas ruach milmata means below here on earth.
Yeah.
But okay, so if you look at Rashi, he says min hashomayim. Milmaila means min hashomayim, and itush is nachas ruach la'adam. Okay, and it means they're pleasant with him, and that means his prayer will be answered. Actually, I should emphasize that. What does it mean? It's a good sign if he sneezes that they're doing him pleasantness here that his nose is now feeling better, that it doesn't have to, that he sneezed. So the same thing is in heaven, they're going to do pleasure for him and they're going to fulfill his request. The angels in heaven, the heavenly court is going to agree with his request, and Hashem will give him what he wants. So